We often imagine prehistoric human survival as a dramatic battle against dangerous predators and freezing ice. Yet one of the most relentless threats they faced had no teeth and made no sound. It was simply the falling rain. When we picture the ancient world, we rarely think about sustained moisture. But rain is unglamorous and persistent, and it was arguably more consistently dangerous than any large predator. A heavy rainstorm extinguished vital fires. It saturated clothing and rotted food. It flooded carefully chosen temporary shelters. Every resource needed to stay alive became exponentially harder to physically obtain. How did our ancestors survive this? This was not a brief experiment or a temporary weekend outdoor inconvenience. It was the baseline physical reality for the vast majority of human history. Early populations lived entirely outdoors in these conditions. They had no insulated walls to retreat behind. Our ancestors did not merely endure these brutal and soaking wet conditions. They managed to expand and thrive in some of the wettest climates on the face of the planet. To understand this remarkable evolutionary achievement, we must start with the immediate problem that cold water creates for human biology. The primary danger of a rainstorm is not the risk of drowning. That is an entirely different conversation. The real physiological threat is rapid heat loss. Water conducts heat away from the body roughly 25 times faster than air. This physical reality changes the survival equation. You wear several layers of clothing and step outside on a gray morning. But the moment water saturates the fabric, the moisture bridges the protective gap between your warm skin and the cold air. It essentially pulls the thermal energy out of your internal biological systems. When you are completely soaked, your body loses stored body heat at a rate your internal metabolism may not be able to replace. The blood vessels near your skin constrict in an effort to preserve core warmth. Your muscles begin to shiver violently to generate friction and internal energy. This physical effort heavily drains your caloric reserves. This dynamic becomes especially critical if the ambient environmental temperature drops and a moderate wind begins to blow. This is precisely why severe hypothermia can be so efficient at killing, even when temperatures remain above freezing. You only need wet outer garments, a mild breeze moving across the landscape, and temperatures around 10 degrees Celsius. The human body does not check the local weather forecast before reacting. It simply responds to the physical laws of thermodynamics and rapid thermal conductivity. Ancient populations understood this relentless drain on their vital physical energy reserves. They learned this not from reading textbooks, but from harsh, practical daily experience. Consequently, the most critical survival skill was actively maintaining core body temperature. The most obvious solution to this cold is generating external heat through fire. But fire and rain are natural enemies. When wood becomes thoroughly saturated with water, the moisture prevents natural ignition from occurring. A small flame exposed to heavy rain will quickly die out completely. So how did early ancient communities keep their vital campfires burning through weeks of continuous heavy precipitation? Early groups likely treated their fires as permanent, continuous social infrastructure, rather than a spontaneous daily event. Starting a new blaze entirely from scratch in a damp environment without modern tools is an exceptionally difficult physical task. Therefore, the fire was rarely allowed to die. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites across Europe shows deep ancient communal hearth structures that appear to have burned continuously for highly extended periods of time. These central hearths were not repeatedly relit. They were constantly fed and carefully protected. They were treated as highly valuable community resources. When the group needed to migrate, they carefully carried the fire with them. You carefully wrap glowing wooden embers inside layers of slow-burning organic material. This might include specific damp moss or pieces of dense shelf fungus. You place this bundle in a pouch and carry it across the wet terrain. Hours later, when you reach a dry overhang, you can blow the embers back into flames. This ancient technique reliably bridged the wet days. Maintaining this essential thermal infrastructure required designated specialized roles within the group. Someone had to stay awake and alert to shield the vulnerable flames from the rain. Before a society developed specialized hunting roles, it almost certainly relied on fire specialists. However, a fire cannot survive heavy rain without some form of reliable overhead protection. A natural canopy alone is rarely completely sufficient. The oldest known constructed primitive shelters date back roughly 400,000 years. Builders angled fallen wooden branches carefully to shed water away from the living center. They layered broad leaves in overlapping rows, much like wooden shingles on a modern roof. Each biological layer overlapped the one below it, ensuring that water ran down the exterior surface rather than dripping through the interior gaps. By the time anatomically modern human populations spread across the colder northern hemisphere, temporary shelters had become highly sophisticated structures. In Eastern Europe, researchers have successfully excavated structures made from heavy solid mammoth bones dating back at least 15,000 years. Prepared animal hides were stretched tightly across this solid structural skeletal frame. These animal hides represented a crucial breakthrough in prehistoric material science and survival engineering. Properly prepared animal skin is remarkably resistant to wind and heavy sustained precipitation. When ancient groups began scraping these hides, stretching them, and treating them with chemical smoke, they were essentially inventing early durable leather. Treated leather acts as a solid barrier. It causes falling water droplets to bead up and roll away without penetrating the inner surface. The skilled hunter kills the animal today, but the hide must be processed slowly over the next several consecutive days or weeks. Evolution never waited for a formal committee to approve these vital technological advancements. Beyond building shelters and treating animal hides, ancient survival relied heavily on reading the landscape. Today, we experience the changing local weather as something that simply happens to us externally. We have outsourced our critical environmental awareness to satellite data and modern optimization systems. Early human populations had no such technological options. Their daily physical survival depended entirely on anticipating the harsh weather before it arrived. The distinct earthy smell of approaching rain, known scientifically as natural petrichor, provided early warning. So did the rapidly changing behavior of animals. Birds often fly much closer to the ground when atmospheric barometric pressure begins to drop. Certain insects swarm differently in highly humid air. If you can accurately read the shifting sky, you do not get trapped in a downpour. You have 3 hours of remaining usable daylight to find elevated ground and securely build shelter. We once possessed this acute sensory environmental awareness, but we eventually traded it for screen notifications. The strategic choice of a physical campsite location was equally critical for managing these environmental threats. Early humans understood this basic physical reality the same way a modern professional plumber knows that water always flows steadily and predictably downhill. They deliberately sought out dense natural tree canopies. A thick overhead layer of broadleaf wooden branches can intercept a significant percentage of falling rainfall, creating a naturally drier protective microclimate beneath it. This provided a crucial advantage before storms escalated. Humans survive these harsh climatic periods as groups. Shared body heat is a measurable physiological mechanism. When a group of freezing humans huddles closely beneath a waterproofed stretched animal hide canopy, they generate and retain thermal energy collectively. Privacy is largely a modern warm weather luxury. When the ambient temperature drops dangerously toward freezing, you sleep closely against other warm human bodies, and our prehistoric ancestors likely did not mind. The shared social proximity physically kept everyone alive. Beyond shelter, prolonged rain changes food availability dramatically. Plant foods that are normally reliable calorie sources become severely waterlogged or inaccessible for many days. The combination of significantly reduced natural food availability and increased caloric demand from maintaining core temperature creates a severe nutritional squeeze for the group. Ancient populations managed this threat through food storage. They carefully stored valuable calories away from moisture. They shifted their foraging targets opportunistically during storms. Earthworms frequently surface in huge numbers after rain. The group menu changed dynamically with the weather. Dietary flexibility was not a mere personality trait, it was an absolutely essential biological survival trait. The physiological bodies of these ancient humans also possessed distinct biological advantages in cold conditions. The human cold shock response provides one example. When an unprepared person falls into cold water, their body triggers a cascade of cardiovascular stress. This response is partly a learned physical sensitivity. People who are regularly exposed to cold water show significantly reduced physical shock responses over time. Early humans were exposed to natural temperature variations on a continuous basis throughout their entire lives. Our ancient cells handled these complex chemical reactions long before anyone formally invented a mechanical thermostat. Despite the intense difficulty of these wet conditions, ancient populations did not deliberately avoid rainy regions. Heavy continuous rainfall naturally feeds rivers with fish and firmly supports vast forests rich with plants. The same atmospheric moisture that threatened severe hypothermia also provided the abundant calories needed for survival. Modern industrialized society often views a rainy day as a frustrating delay to typical outdoor plans. But for the vast majority of human history, severe rain was an unavoidable condition of existence. It required deep social cooperation and environmental knowledge, but it was never inherently the absolute enemy. Every waterproof synthetic jacket and insulated modern home is ultimately downstream of those freezing ancient nights. They survived the falling atmospheric water for generations using deeply accumulated knowledge, vital social bonds, and the stubborn endurance of the human body.